Yo guys, welcome back to a brand new video. Today we're going to dive into my Torment 16 Demon Hunter Gears of the Dreadland Bola Edition build. Now before we dive into the build, I just want to talk about a few reasons why you should consider playing this. For starters, it's something different. Hungering Arrow is incredibly boring. It doesn't really look that cool, and when you're using bolas, you get a lot of cool extra effects where you can pull all of the enemies in at a time, and you also get great AoE coverage. One issue that the Hungering Arrow version of this build has is that it really does lack AoE. At times it can kind of feel like you have good coverage because you're shooting out so many Hungering Arrows so quickly. But one of the problems is that you will typically leave behind a decent number of stragglers. Now this won't generally make a huge difference leaving behind a few enemies here and there, but generally speaking, over the course of many rifts, if you're using this build, you should be able to clear a little bit faster because you're not really leaving any enemies behind. Let's go ahead and start by diving into some of the skills and passives that we use. For starters, we're going to go ahead and take Preparation with Focused Mind. This is just to keep our discipline going so that we can spam Smokescreen as much as we'd like. We're also going to be taking Strafe with Drifting Shadow, just to make sure that while we are strafing, we can move at our normal speed. For the Bola rune, we're going to take Volatile Explosives. The explosion is 20 yards, which is better than any of the other runes, which is why we're going to take this. For Smokescreen, you're going to want to take the Special Recipe rune. This is going to keep the discipline cost down. Generally speaking, we don't have enough resource cost reduction because we're not using a Yangs to actually switch to something like Displacement. But if you'd like to drop the Dawn out of the cube and move this bow into the cube instead and run this build with the Yangs, you won't have permanent uptime on Vengeance, but you will be able to change the Smokescreen rune to Displacement, which would make this build a little bit faster. I will say though that the build kind of already moves fast enough, and I really don't feel like you need to add that Yangs and lose your permanent uptime on Vengeance. Next up, we're going to take Companion. We're going to go with Bat Companion. We don't need Wolf Companion for the additional damage. We don't need anything like Fan of Knives for the extra armor. This is nice just in case we hit a dry spell where we're not really getting any enemies. I will note, however, that this is a bit of a flex spot. You can kind of play whatever you'd like here. You don't necessarily need Companion to run this build, and so feel free to test anything you'd like. Next up, we're going to take Vengeance with Darkheart, primarily just so that we can get 50% damage reduction. For the passives, we're going to go ahead and take Tactical Advantage to keep us moving quickly. This is also why we're going to take Hot Pursuit. We're also going to be taking Night Stalker to make sure that our hatred is staying up. We're going to be firing off a lot of manual bolas. This is really nice to have just in case you're ever having hatred issues. Kind of the same reason I run that Companion with Bat Companion. However, feel free to take whatever you'd like here if you're not having any issues with hatred. Mostly just for situations where you get a bad map and kind of have to go a long stretch without any enemies to kill. For the last passive, we're going to take Ambush. Goes in almost every single Demon Hunter build. Really allows us to kind of one-shot enemies and do substantial damage on that first hit. For the gear, we're going to be wearing 5 pieces of Gears of the Dreadland. We are going to be using a Ring of Royal Grandeur in the cube. Before we move on, it is worth noting that since this is a Torment 16 build, don't necessarily feel like you need to have all of the correct rolls or perfectly optimized gear. This build is going to work absolutely great, even if you're not necessarily perfectly geared for it. Before the helm, these are going to be the stats that you want: Dex, Vitality, Crit Chance, and a socket with a diamond in it. For the mechanical pauldrons, you will want that dexterity and resist all elements. You don't need that area damage. You're more than welcome to get resource cost reduction there, or even vitality. The cooldown reduction is nice. For the chest, dexterity, vitality, all resist, 3 sockets with diamonds in it. That's what you want to go for. You'll also want a Squirt's Necklace for your amulet. Dexterity is fine. Ideally for this build, you would want fire damage, but crit chance, crit damage, and a socket. I would recommend using Taeguk as well for this build. For the gloves, we will be using Gears of the Dreadland. Dexterity is fine, crit chance, crit damage. Again, you don't need this area damage. Feel free to take resource cost reduction or vitality. For the bracers, if you are a lower Paragon, you're going to want to go with Guardians. If you have about 2500 or more Paragon levels, you can switch this out to using Wraps of Clarity. But you will want fire damage, dexterity, vitality, and crit chance. For the belt, this is going to be our other piece of the Guardian set. Once again, if you are a higher Paragon level, feel free to drop this and just wear the Hunter's Wrath. Dexterity and vitality are good, all resist would be better than armor, and of course Bola damage would be better than Hungering Arrow. Once again, since this is just a T16 build, I'm using my primary Hungering Arrow gear, and we really don't need the additional Bola damage, but if you really want to go all out, go ahead and roll that Bola damage instead of Hungering Arrow. For the rings, you'll be using Focus and Restraint. Feel free to swap these out for the Pandemonium Loop and Rechel's Ring of Larceny. Granted, this build does go really fast already, and so you don't necessarily need that ring combo, but if you want to speed it up even more, feel free to give it a shot. Regardless of which set of rings you choose to go with, you will want crit, crit, socket, and either dexterity or average damage. The exact same thing can be said for the restraint, either dex or average damage, crit, crit, socket. It's also worth noting that you'll want the Boon of the Hoarder and Simplicity Strength. Simplicity Strength is great because we are using Bolas, which are a primary skill, so this just adds a ton of damage to our character, while Boon of the Hoarder is really only here to keep us moving quickly. For the leg slot, we are going to go with the Depth Diggers here. You're going to want Dexterity, Vitality. You can take Resist All Elements here, however getting 2 sockets with diamonds in them is going to give you more resistance. Now once again, I do have Hungering Arrow damage here because these are coming off of my primary build. However, if you really want to go all out, you can roll Bola damage here. One last note that I will make about the Depth Diggers is to be aware of that secondary roll. It has a range of 80 to 100%, so you want to get that as high as possible. And for the boots, we're also going with Gears of the Dreadland. Dexterity, Vitality, All Resist, and Armor are going to be the stats that you want. Next up, we're going to be using MMA's Duffel. I honestly have no idea how to pronounce that. I'm probably saying it wrong, but this is where a lot of our Bola damage is going to come from, and it's going to make our Bolas instantly explode. You want that dexterity, attack speed, crit chance, cooldown. You can take resource cost reduction here. I think it makes the build a little bit easier to play. However, you could also roll Bola damage percent here. Honestly though, I do recommend taking resource cost reduction as well because you really don't need that damage. We're one-shotting absolutely everything in Torment 16, and so it makes the build a little bit easier to play to take that resource cost reduction. By adding additional Bola damage, you're kind of just adding overkill to monsters. For this piece, you'll want to take note of your secondary roll as well. I've only got 164% increased damage to my Bolas. The range isn't particularly large, but try to go for as close to 175 as you can. So for the bow, we're going to be using Leonine, and this is why we have such great coverage and we're never going to be leaving any stragglers behind. So every single time that you fire a Bola, we're getting 150% increased damage to it, but more importantly, we're pulling all of the enemies in together to make sure that nothing survives. For the stats on this, you're going to want to go with that dexterity, you're going to want cooldown, you'll want that socket added with your Ramalandi's gift. For the attack speed, you could absolutely roll something else there instead, such as resource cost reduction or vitality. For the cube, we're going to be going with Dawn to keep Vengeance up permanently. Since we're using the Guardian set, we're going to want to keep our Hunter's Wrath in the cube. And lastly, we'll be using that Ring of Royal Grandeur to get the 3-piece bonus from Guardians and the 6-piece bonus from Gears of the Dreadland. Just to take a quick look at the follower, you're going to want to make sure you have those important emanating items. Make sure you've got the Flavor of Time, Nemesis Bracers, Oculus Ring, and Avarice Band are really nice as well. I'd also recommend using the Cane set here. 3 pieces is going to get us that bonus so that we just get additional Greater Rift keys. Gloves of Worship are especially important this season because our potion gives us the Shrine powers. This allows them to last for 10 minutes. I would recommend taking Crippling Shot, Anatomy, Piercing Shot, and Vanish. The only other note that I have about this scoundrel is to make sure that you get at least 25,000 dexterity. Well guys, I'm going to go ahead and dive into some gameplay so that you can see this build in action. Go ahead and drop a comment down below. Let me know if you've tried this build and how it's working out for you.
You've been lost and alone in the city of lights, I know. Getting high, feeling low, and it's out of your control. You should know that I won't leave you. I'll stay beside you. I'm never letting you go. You've been lost and alone in the city of lights, I know. But I will guide you home. But I will guide you home.
Well guys, I hope you enjoyed the gameplay. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one.